Welcome back. Today is January 19th, 2026. Check the countdown in the corner. That timer is our reality check. The next efficient Mars launch window in late 2026. These windows come around about every 26 months. Miss one, and the next one is roughly 2 years later. So today, we're cutting through the hype. 3 boss fights stand between Starship and Mars: orbital refueling, launch cadence, and the landing. But first, where does the hardware actually stand right now?
We ended 2025 on a strong note. Starship Flight 11 launched on October 13, 2025, and the liftoff shot on screen is the proof. Super Heavy made a controlled splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico, and the ship splashed down in the Indian Ocean. And the big one? They pulled off an in-space engine relight, non-negotiable for any Starship that's going to leave Earth orbit.
It was a good flight, but now we're waiting on Flight 12, penciled in as the step into version 3 hardware. And version 3 already reminded us what new means. On November 21st, 2025, the first V3 booster, Booster 18, suffered a major anomaly during ground pressure testing. That's the trade. Bigger capability, bigger risk, right as the calendar gets loud.
And it's not just about the rockets working. It's about how many you can launch. On the Texas side, the FAA's Starbase process is scoped to up to 25 Starship Super Heavy orbital launches per year. In Florida, the Department of the Air Force signed a record of decision in November 2025 to redevelop SLC-37 for Starship, an enormous green light for construction, even though flights still hinge on FAA licensing and airspace work. Florida is the scale lever, but it's still a build-out. The vehicle is flying. The full fleet machine isn't online yet. So, a working rocket, a tight window, and a logistical mountain. Let's talk about hurdle number 1, the orbital gas station.
People look at the launch pad and think that's the hard part. It isn't. The real boss fight happens a few hundred kilometers up, in silence. The orbital gas station.
So we're not just launching a ship and flying to Mars.
Not without refueling. To get a ship that big into orbit, you spend most of what's in the tanks. You arrive in low Earth orbit with enough for control and contingencies, not a Mars departure.
Right. You're not out of gas, but you're out of options. If you want to leave Earth orbit with a heavy ship, you have to top it back up. A full Starship is on the order of 1,000+ tons of propellant. If one tanker can deliver something like 100 tons to orbit after all the losses and operations, you're counting launches by the dozen.
That's 12 launches just to gas up one ship.
At least. Public estimates for Artemis-style refueling talk about high teens once you include realities. How much each tanker actually delivers, boil-off, and the choreography. And the receipt on screen is the point. One departure equals a long list of launches.
And that assumes the transfer actually works. This is the engineering hurdle people skip past. Moving cryogenic liquids in microgravity is its own sport. On Earth, gravity keeps liquid at the bottom where your outlets are. Up there, it clings, sloshes, and breaks into blobs, like the cutaway we're looking at. If you ingest vapor instead of liquid, pumps can cavitate and engines can starve.
But didn't they test this already? I remember hearing about a fuel transfer test last year.
They did an internal transfer. During a March 2024 flight test, they moved liquid oxygen from a header tank into the main tank on the same ship, tied to NASA's tipping point work. That's a real milestone.
But it's not the same as ship to ship.
Exactly. NASA's own cryogenic transfer guidelines say the hard version, cryogenic propellant transfer between independent spacecraft, still hasn't been demonstrated. Now you have to rendezvous and dock, chill the plumbing so the propellant doesn't flash boil, manage pressure and gauging, and push huge amounts of liquid across that interface.
And the interface is where nightmares live. A small leak can turn into an oxygen-rich plume around warm hardware. Meanwhile, if you wait too long between tankers, your depot warms, vents, and your inventory walks off into space.
So we have a race against time, even while sitting in orbit.
Correct. It's a thermal clock, like that gauge and the flipping calendar. You have to fill faster than you lose.
Which is why Cadence becomes the boss mechanic. To beat boil-off and keep schedules, you need rapid launches, repeatedly, until the depot and the ship are topped off. You don't need one hero launch, you need a fleet.
Which leads us perfectly into the next boss fight. If the gas station works, can we actually launch the tankers fast enough to keep it open?
Everyone fixates on engines, but the real boss fight for Mars is the calendar. A Mars attempt isn't one launch, it's a fast, fragile logistics chain that can't snap.
Walk us through the numbers. If we want to send just one Starship to Mars in the 2026 window, what does the launch schedule actually look like?
It depends on payload and how much margin you want, but use a representative case, on the order of a dozen tanker flights to fill a Mars-bound ship. Add a depot flight and the Mars ship itself, and you're talking roughly 13 to 15 launches that all have to go right.
And you can't leisurely spread that over months. Cryogenic propellants warm up and vent. Unless you're doing true zero boil-off storage, time is literally fuel lost. You're racing thermodynamics.
Which is why that on-screen timeline is so compressed. To make the math plausible, you're thinking weeks, not seasons. Say, 14 launches in 30 days, about one every 2 days. And that already assumes you survive scrubs. Scale to multiple ships and you're flirting with near-daily ops.
But SpaceX is already launching all the time. Didn't they hit something like 165 launches with Falcon 9 in 2025?
They did. 165 orbital launches in 2025 is an extraordinary cadence. Basically, every other day. But that's a mature system across multiple ranges and paths. Starship has to earn that rhythm while the hardware and ground flow are still getting stood up. Look at the pad and build site shot. It's a very different maturity level. And there's a policy gate too. Right now, the FAA's current environmental approval for Starbase supports up to 25 Starship Super Heavy launches per year. Going beyond that isn't just try harder, it's a new approval cycle. A Mars-style campaign would chew through that annual allowance fast.
It's also a plumbing bottleneck. That tank farm photo is the tell. You're not just launching rockets, you're running a cryogenic supply chain, locks and methane deliveries, storage, chill down, conditioning, and turnaround, over and over. At high cadence, the launch site starts acting like a continuous industrial plant.
And here's the killer constraint. Interruptions. If you have a mishap, FAA rules trigger reporting, investigation, and corrective actions before return to flight. Your cadence can freeze for weeks. In a tight Mars opportunity, a multi-week slip can push you out of the window, and then, like that closing iris visual, the chance shuts until the next alignment, roughly 26 months later.
So it's not just about building enough rockets. It's whether the range, the regulations, and the plumbing can handle the speed.
Precisely. A Mars attempt is an operations exam, not just a rocket exam.
Here's the hardest truth about the 2026 window. We've watched Starship prototypes land on Earth, and we've watched full-scale ships pull off controlled splashdowns. But Mars isn't a repeat run with a red filter. Aerodynamically, it's a different animal.
But the maneuver's still the same on paper, right? Belly flop, flip, landing burn. SN15 nailed the vibe years ago.
The choreography looks familiar. The environment is not. Mars is thin, but it's still thick enough to hit you with serious entry heating, and too thin to give you the kind of drag you're used to seeing on Earth.
Let's anchor it with the numbers we're showing. Earth sea level pressure is about 1 bar. Mars averages around 6 millibars at the surface, well under 1% of Earth.
Right. On Earth, the atmosphere bleeds off most of your energy before you ever think about a landing burn. On Mars, especially at Starship scale, you don't get that luxury. You're still moving very fast at low altitude.
So you can't just float it down, wait until it's slow, then flip.
No. You have to commit to supersonic retropropulsion, lighting engines while you're still supersonic, because you need thrust to finish the job the air can't. And look at what the visual is implying, firing a plume upstream into oncoming flow. The bow shock, the exhaust, the vehicle wake, they all fight each other. NASA's done wind tunnel work and modeling on this for years, but nobody's demonstrated it at anything like Starship size.
And size matters. The heaviest payload that's been soft-landed on Mars is Perseverance, about 1,025 kilograms, roughly a metric ton.
And a Starship is what?
Order of magnitude bigger. Public estimates put an empty ship around the 100-plus ton class, and you'd still want significant propellant on board for landing. So you're talking about scaling the landing problem by something like 2 orders of magnitude.
Then there's the heat shield. Even on Earth returns, we've seen how sensitive tile integrity is. On a Mars entry, a single bad gap or missing tile can turn into a fast-moving burn-through. No abort mode, no second pass.
So for 2026, it's not just get there, it's can you stick the landing on a planet that gives you almost no margin?
Correct. New boss fight. Even if launch and refueling work, you still have Mars's version of the 7 minutes of terror, and it can absolutely end with a crater.
We're 10 months out. It's January 19th, 2026, and the favourable Earth-Mars window is late 2026, roughly November into early 2027. So, is this a go or a no-go?
If I look at that dashboard, orbital refueling is flashing red. NASA's own guidance is blunt. Cryogenic propellant transfer between independent spacecraft still hasn't been demonstrated.
That's the gate. SpaceX did a tank-to-tank liquid oxygen transfer demo on the March 2024 flight. Useful, but it's still inside one vehicle. Ship-to-ship is a different beast. Without it, Starship can't do a serious Mars departure.
And we're running out of runway to practice. That pad shot of the full stack is the reminder. You need a rehearsed campaign, repeatable rendezvous, repeatable transfer, not a lucky shot.
We also have to talk about the hardware transition. SpaceX is moving into the version 3 generation, and Booster 18 suffered an anomaly during a gas system pressure test last November, on November 21st, 2025. Any reset like that costs tempo.
Right, test anomalies ripple through schedules. And Elon Musk has said an uncrewed Mars attempt by late 2026 is 50-50, with on-orbit refueling as the key dependency.
Honestly, 50-50 feels optimistic unless we see a clean ship-to-ship transfer demo by summer. But there is a third option between success and failure.
You mean a Pathfinder mission?
Exactly. You launch, you refuel in Earth orbit, and you commit to the transfer. But you don't promise a landing. You promise data.
It validates the logistics chain. Tanker cadence, rendezvous and transfer, long-duration cruise. Even if the Mars arrival doesn't end in a soft landing, you've still proven you can fuel in orbit and get a ship to Mars.
It's a crash test run on a planetary scale. And that Mars entry visual, plasma heating, the belly taking the load, underscores it. Heat shield and control data alone can be worth the cost.
So the verdict is, late 2026 isn't about colonization yet. It's about proving the pipeline works, refuel, depart, and learn what Mars entry really does to the vehicle.
If they launch, it's to buy data with hardware.
We'll be watching the countdown clock right along with you. Thanks for listening to this deep dive on Starship 2026.